Welcome to Complex Kids, Simple Solutions, the podcast where we cut through the chaos of raising a neurodivergent and a complex kid with a practical, no-nonsense strategy. I'm Michelle Shoaidi, speaker, advocate, and a mom of a complex kid myself. If you've ever felt overwhelmed, unheard, or just plain exhausted on this journey, you are not alone. Here we tackle the real struggles head on, share actionable insights, and remind you that small wins matter. Let's dive in and make life just a little bit easier, one episode at a time. You are your child's hero. Today, we're so excited to have Michelle Kennedy, who is a licensed clinical social worker with over a decade of experience in healthcare, specializing in pediatric care for medically complex kids. Throughout her career, Michelle has worked at the intersection of clinical care, care coordination, and patient advocacy, empowering families to navigate complex healthcare systems with confidence. With a deep commitment to improving access, communication, and support, she strives to foster meaningful conversations about healthcare, social work, and the power of advocacy. Hi, Michelle. Today you have two Michelles with you in our podcast. So today I have Michelle Kennedy here, and she is from the Thompson Autism Center, which is at the Children's Hospital in Orange County. And we're so excited to have her. Michelle, welcome. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Michelle. It's really nice to be here. Nice to see you again. Happy to chat.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it that you and the Chalk team is so willing to do this, because I really feel like coming from a place of where you guys are, which is a multidisciplinary type place, it just, there's so much that you can talk to and teach all the mamas and the dads that are out there that have, what I like to call our little complex kids. So thank you for coming. Well, let's get started with you. Tell me about what you do, how you got to doing what you're doing. And so just give us a little bit of background on you.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to do that. So I am a social worker. I've been a social worker for almost about a decade, working in healthcare for the most of that time, working in pediatrics specifically. And I think that what brought me to that field and what still drives me in this capacity and what I love about this profession and field as a whole is the ability to kind of really work with variety of different groups and people. I think specifically in healthcare, working with complex populations and really kind of helping families and our providers identify what are the gaps, what are the needs of the patient and the family, and how can we kind of better support them. There are so many, as you know, there's so many gaps in care for a lot of different reasons. And so something that I love about kind of the role of the social worker and being a social worker is being able to problem solve and investigate what those gaps are, and then come up with solutions to kind of better support really the family patient experience kind of as a whole. So that's what compels me in terms of being a social worker. That's what brought me to the field and kind of keeps me going.
Mm-hmm. I think that every time that they offered a social worker to me, and I think that has happened just a couple of times in my life, but I think one of them was when my son was born, and he was in the NICU, and he was born 8 weeks premature. And so he was in the NICU for 4 weeks, and it was offered. And I think that at the time, I really didn't understand the role of a social worker. And so it was kind of well, I don't know. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what it was going to help me with. And I think that knowing what I know now, I probably would have taken more advantage of what was offered at the time. So it seems like you guys really bring it all together in a support system for the family. So, in the position that you're in, which is in pediatrics, so it's a little bit different than I think what I would have had before. But what is in the position you're in right now? What does it look like when you are collaborating in the care of the children? What does that entail?
Yeah, I think that to speak to kind of your experience really quick, I think that that's a very common experience. I think social workers are trained to really work across industries, across roles, with kind of the purpose of working for people within their context. So social workers are everywhere. They're in corporate worlds, they're in healthcare administration, they're in nonprofits, they're in case management, they're private individual therapists. So social workers have these really kind of a variety of skills, and a lot of people don't really know how to utilize them. What purpose do they serve? My guess is that with your son in the NICU, my guess is you were probably offered a social worker if there was some because of the complexity of having a child in the NICU, and sometimes, medical complexity that can either be the reason why or kind of accompany that. A social worker is often kind of requested to consult with the family or check in with the family, to be a person for support, to help them even just, navigate maybe some paperwork or navigate what this means. What does his extended stay in the NICU mean? Kind of helping to prep for discharge. Are you, how is the home environment? Do you feel like you have what you need to bring them back home? Things like that. A social worker would be brought in to kind of, support in that way.
And I think that that's how it was, to be honest. And now that I'm thinking about it, I think it was a lot like, do you have the support at home? Like, because that is really what you're trying to do, is just to make sure that they have a support system. And when you are, and I'm going to go back to the NICU, like when you have a child in the NICU, you just delivered a child and you're not taking your child home with you. You're leaving them behind. And the guilt that comes along with that, not being with your child and not being with those, that is, I think, where, like, had I known what I know now, I probably would have taken a little bit more advantage of that, because it's almost like a year to listen to you too, like somebody that will be there to kind of help you through, like, even your emotions. I feel like you guys kind of do take that part on this. But yes, so let's talk about, I know that, you are in this center, and the center is amazing for the people who are able to, if you live in Orange County, you should be somehow figuring out how to get into the Thompson Center. So, but let's talk about that a little bit, because, the kids that are there, they are neurodevelopmental, you have neurodevelopmental disorders, you have the autism, and you have the complexities that we were talking about, right? The complex kids that have multiple diagnoses, like Drake is. So let's talk about that. Like, what does that look like when you are working in a place like that? What does that look like as a social worker?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And so it's interesting. So it's very similar to kind of like in the inpatient in the hospital, related to the NICU example with your experience. There's a lot of similarities in that a social worker is really there in our center to support all parties involved. So we have multiple social workers. One is really designated to work in the clinic, we call it, with families. So your clinic visit with your doctors. And then there's another role for a social worker who kind of does a lot of kind of the referral process. So like make sure that we are seeing and caring for the appropriate types of kids, and for the other referrals, making sure that their pediatricians are kind of directing them in the right place. But to speak to the kind of in-clinic social worker, there's a few different things that the in-clinic social worker is really there to support the families with. For example, having a new diagnosis, whether that's autism or whether that's something else, because we do see really the most kind of complex kids in the hospital system because of the neurodevelopmental kind of diagnostic profiles along with medical complexities. We see a lot of really kind of complex kids for a lot of different reasons. And the social worker is there to support a family in receiving a diagnosis. Perhaps the family is not coping well with receiving the diagnosis. Perhaps that's a shock. Perhaps that's just overwhelming. It's overwhelming to get any kind of new information about your child, whether or not you had, an inkling. I know many families say that. I think that can be quite an overwhelming time. So a social worker is often brought in or requested by the physician or the clinical team to provide that family with support. In the same way that if your child is in the NICU, a social worker is brought into the room with the family to make sure, do you understand kind of what happened today? Do you understand what this diagnosis means? Let's chat a little bit about first how you're feeling. That's where kind of that therapeutic intervention comes into play. How are you experiencing this moment? And then, let's help you plan what this looks like. So what are kind of next steps? What does the long-term plan look like? So the social worker in our clinic is, kind of helps to bring it all together.
I will tell you, you hit the nail on the head. Like it is probably one of the hardest things to deal with getting that diagnosis, even when you have that mama gut that I always talk about, like that there's something there, but then you don't really know what it is. And then you go and you search and then you finally get a diagnosis. And sometimes it's like, it can feel like a relief in a way because you finally got a diagnosis and you have that. But there's also the other part, which is like almost like a grieving that you go through because the child that you expected to have when you get pregnant, when you first know that you're pregnant, the life that you picture and you envision for a child is not what you're going to get. And it is a different situation. And I talk a lot about this with the moms that are listening right now, is that you have to allow yourself to have those feelings. And the grief, I feel like a social worker can really kind of, okay, this is gonna happen. This is a normal process on how this is going to go down. And also, I love it that you said that you can help put together a plan. What is this going to look like from now on? Like, what is it that you have to do to continue? And what kind of care are you going to have for your child? So I honestly, I think that what you social workers do with the pediatrics it's an important, and it goes unnoticed, I think, a lot of times. And so, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, is because you guys you do so much, but we don't realize, because we're always talking to the doctors and the therapists, but not necessarily with the social worker.
Yeah. And some families, need more support. Some need less support. Some need some more support at certain times of the process, and some need less. So you're always going to be meeting with your physician or your clinical provider. That's like really your point of contact. The social worker is like, we are working within our scope. So we are not recommending medications. We're not recommending therapies. We're taking the direction from the physician or the clinical provider, and then helping the family to figure out, what does that look like? If you're figuring out a medication plan, what is your daily schedule? How can we kind of figure out a plan to implement that medication, for example? There's, we can work in a lot of different kind of capacities too. So happy to kind of clarify and shore up anything that we can here.
Sure. Now, in addition to this management, this case management that you guys do, like, what other roles do social workers actually play in helping the families with these challenges? Like outside, I think we talked about some of them, but let's like nail it down to some of these direct interventions that you guys actually do.
So again, social workers, can be found, we can be found everywhere in a variety of different roles. So the way that our clinic social worker functions within the clinic at the Thompson Autism and Neurodevelopmental Center is different than perhaps in a pediatrician's office, perhaps in a different specialty clinic. So that is the function of our clinic social worker. I would differentiate it from case management in that case management really helps to connect a family to the service. It's not quite at this moment in time anyway, things are always changing, but at this moment in time, it's not quite how our clinic social worker functions just within kind of within our clinic. But a case management social worker would really be the one to help a family secure kind of connection to a therapy or a service in the community. So help them really get connected to, let's say, regional center, or help them get connected to the recommended therapies, ABA therapy, speech, OT, et cetera. There are also, social workers can also be therapists. So families who are, have a lot kind of going on. We all have so much going on. Sometimes we'll see families who really are having a hard time managing kind of a lot of things, and now getting a new diagnosis, or now maybe there's new behaviors with their child or something. It just adds on an additional element, and perhaps maybe the parents aren't doing well with their own mental health. So we might recommend that they get established with like a mental health provider in the community, which could also be a social worker. That therapist on the receiving end could also be a social worker. So I think globally, social workers are really there to help families figure out how to take recommendations and make them practical and accessible. But yeah, to your point, I think that there's case managers. There's also social workers within insurance plans sometimes that help families understand the benefits that an insurance plan can offer them. So I always guide families to look for the social worker wherever they're at, because often they're the ones who are kind of trying to problem solve and come up with the practical solutions.
Yes, for sure. And it's interesting that you say that, because really, you touched on it. It's problem solving. Like, one of the biggest things, like right now, that we were dealing with just recently was trying to find an ABA place that would take Drake, that didn't have a 6-month waiting list. And our insurance company actually had a social worker, and she was the one that was like, okay, let's try to find something in the area. And then, there was one incident, and to be honest, I'm pretty sure it was you that helped me, but Drake had a really big meltdown in the house, and we weren't home, and it was an awful night, to the point that the neighbors got called and things like that. And we really needed to put in place, like, what do we do if this ever happens again? And I think that you sent me the crisis information, because in California, in the state of California, they have a separate number that you call when it is a child who has a developmental disorder, or is in the special needs area. So they have different people that actually come into the house to help with these times. And so, but I didn't even know that existed, really. So that is a lot of it is definitely something. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and you wouldn't necessarily know otherwise, right? Like, I think that we just as humans learn as we go along. Like, no one has informed. I have children as well, and no one like told me how to be a a parent, like I think in a real practical way, right? Yes. And so then you become a parent, and then you are navigating this life with this child who you're also still learning about and understanding and navigating these systems. And then you have the healthcare system, which is its own kind of complex thing. And definitely a component of what we do, especially in healthcare, is the safety plan. I would call that safety planning with the family. If something does happen, if Drake is having a hard time, if Drake is having a meltdown, what's like the severity level? Let's safety plan for, whether it's low severity or if it's really kind of high severity. Let's have kind of all these different plans in place that we can understand and that seem doable for you to put into place.
Yeah, for sure. That was a very tough night for us. And I kind of wish that before that had happened, that we had had something in place, because it was very hard on the babysitter that was here. And me and my husband, we were out, and we were at a fundraising event, and I didn't have my phone. It was inside my purse, and I wasn't even checking. And then when I checked, it was like, oh crap, all of this is happening. And, we had no safety protocol or safety, guards on anything. So definitely I encourage every parent that's listening to actually have that, and look for a social worker that can help you do this. Okay, now, how, as a social worker, coming from your perspective, how can parents of these complex kids best advocate for their child within the medical, educational, in the community? Like, how can a social worker actually support that advocacy for the children?
Yeah, I think truly that other parents are the best resource. I think that, in addition to kind of providing my clinical recommendations, my safety recommendations kind of per family, I also always direct people to find other parents. So currently at the center, we have a group for moms of kids with autism. And I think kind of in the way that you're developing this podcast and in the work that you do and connecting other parents to each other, parents really are the best resources, because you've tried all the things. You know what works, you know what doesn't work, you know which organization is going to be easy to get into, and you know which ones are hard. I think from a clinical team perspective, we can provide the recommendations, but we don't know in the same way as a family who is 24/7 trying to navigate this complex and, kind of largely broken system. So I always direct families to each other. I direct, especially, moms, parents to each other. Your child best. This is something that I really try to remind our families. And I think that our clinical team leads from this perspective as well, is that your child best. So what feels unusual or what seems unusual, what feels concerning. And I would continue parents to just keep listening to that gut feeling, as you mentioned earlier, because I think that's important. And sometimes a clinician, a physician, a clinical provider might not understand, because maybe technically, medically, it doesn't add up. I would encourage families to kind of continue advocating or looking for suggestions, advice, answers for their child if there's anything that feels kind of off. So I think, to answer your question, I think continue to keep advocating. That's the only way that things get moved forward. And I think I really encourage parents to kind of look to each other to really glean a lot of that insight and wisdom from each other.
Yeah. You touched on something that's very important for parents to know and to remember every time, is that nobody knows your child better than you. And there's nobody else better to advocate for your child than yourself. And so participating in these communities really helps you learn from the moms. And I look back at all the years that I have had, and without my mom group that I have, that we created when Drake was in preschool, like we still get together. They still come to all the birthday parties because we met in their classroom. And so they're all the same age. So we have the birthdays, we talk to each other. When we're having a hard time, they're there for you. This is the best thing that you can do for yourself and even for your child too, because if you're not well, your child's not going to be well. So 100% I agree. And thank you for leading the moms that need that into a community, because it makes the world of difference, like a world of difference when you have a community around you.
Yeah, definitely. I would just encourage from the clinical side to try to bring in your clinical team as much as possible. Like the most effective way to approach anything is going to be collaboratively. And so if, whether your clinical team is at Chalk or somewhere else, I would encourage, on the clinical side as well, we need to participate and collaborate with our patients just as much as I would hope the families are collaborating with their clinical teams too.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about some resources. Like, what are some of the most underutilized and utilized resources that families should be aware of that you know of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Thompson Autism and Neurodevelopmental Center has a resource specialist dedicated to providing resources to families, which is so valuable. That's like a huge luxury that our team has in that team member. I think, I mean, I think a big resource is the regional center. And it can be hard to navigate the regional center, but I think that they really could be a huge resource if you're able to kind of get connected with them. Or even get connected with someone who can kind of help walk you through what that looks like. I think really working together with your clinical team, because the physician, the clinical provider, is the one recommending the treatments, the therapies, et cetera. Working with them, letting them know, him having a hard time finding an ABA provider, et cetera, because it is possible that they have heard from another family about some other resource. I think if your insurance plan has a social worker, I would reach out to them and see what other resources, benefits are you eligible for. I always encourage people to ask, what else should I be asking? What am I not asking that I should? What have other families kind of similar to myself, what do they typically need? What have they typically been able to take advantage of? I would always ask, so you can kind of learn, we don't know what we don't know. And so trying to find out some more information there. Yeah.
The question should be, what don't I know that I should know? It's true. It's true, because you don't know what you don't know. So, and I think that these communities with the moms too, like when you talk to each other, you'll find out those things. Some of the state programs, and for the people who are listening that are not from California, the Regional Center is a state-funded program that we are able to access in California. And I know that in other states, they have different programs. So it's knowing and navigating those programs, and it is a nightmare. It's a nightmare. You don't know anything about it. And so, like, learning little things, like here in California, this is something I didn't know, but I know now, is that the Regional Center actually picks up 2 weeks of summer camp for Drake when he's off of school. So they actually pay for the summer camps. There are so many things, so many resources that come from that state-funded program that we need to learn and be able to utilize in a way, right? So definitely, I think that that's something that you guys bring to the table too, is probably helping people find those programs and get involved.
Right. And I think that to your point, like regional centers, they work differently, county by county, but also across, other states across the country. They work differently. They serve different populations. They have different kind of protocols and ways that they're structured. So I think to your point, I would reach out to your clinical team, reach out to other parents to find out locally, regionally, what is there to take advantage of, and how to get involved. How can you find out how, to get enrolled or to start kind of that process. And I think that it's amazing that Regional Center is able to cover the summer camp for Drake. A lot of people, honestly, some people I've spoken with at the Regional Center don't even know all the resources that they're able to provide families. And it's just because it's kind of nebulous and complex. There's stuff that just people, we're always kind of learning about. That regional center specifically can be such a big support, but also there's a lot to be unlocked there that many of us don't even know at this point in time. So, so sharing your knowledge, finding out what's been successful for you, I think is huge.
Yes, for sure. Now, this is probably one of the most important things, and we kind of touched on this on crisis interventions, but like when families hit a crisis point, it could be emotionally, it could be what happened with Drake, or financial, like what immediate steps should they take, and how can a social worker actually help with that?
Yeah, I think when there is a crisis, or preparing for how to respond to a crisis, if that were to occur, if there's a crisis of safety, if you're concerned for your child's safety or the safety of others, because of the way that your child is speaking, behaving, etc., then we typically recommend here locally anyway, calling that crisis assessment team. It's the CAT team. They're a response team that is trained to be addressing kind of like the psychosocial pieces of what's leading a child or a person to be in crisis. So they're like, have more training on mental health and what can be contributing to this crisis. Not every place has that. I will say they don't respond immediately sometimes. And so if there is an urgent, imminent concern for danger, we always recommend either calling 911 or, if you can, taking your child for around here to the CHOC emergency department. And that's for like, an acute psychiatric concern around danger for self or others. I think a social worker can help by giving families that information ahead of time, reminding them. Sometimes when we're told something and we kind of don't know if we'll need it, we don't listen to it. Like that's just, I think, human nature. It doesn't really stick in our brains. So we try to reiterate, and if there is safety concern, this is what to do. That is what I would suggest in terms of kind of safety planning to kind of how to respond to some of those most pressing kind of issues.
Acute, yes.
Right.
Well, yeah. I am definitely grateful for having that now, because I wish that I had that before it happened, but you don't know until you actually need it that you need it. So you don't know that. Well, Michelle, we're getting to the end here. So, and I always, it's been great to have you, but I have a question, and it's usually, what are your words? Like, what is something that you could tell the moms and the dads that are listening here, like that is most important coming from a social worker? Your last words of wisdom.
the last words of wisdom. I think try to keep in mind collaboration and trying to, work with the people who are really on the care team. This is from a clinical perspective. From a social work perspective, I think if you can maintain kind of an air of collaboration, it's going to better serve, I think, everyone involved. It's going to better serve the patient. However, I know that can be hard if you don't, get along with, if you don't get along with certain like providers or agencies in the community, or you're having barriers. Mm-hmm. I would say when barriers inevitably come up, try to approach from a collaborative spirit. Sometimes you have to pivot and find another, let's say, agency provider or something. But I think kind of collaboration is key. And from a clinical perspective, I would encourage families to be open and honest with their clinical team. Let us know what's working. Let us know what's not working. Us clinical providers can, often kind of send you with our recommendations, and then you're on your merry way, and we never know really what is working or not. So please keep us in the loop so we can kind of better serve your child, your children, and then you kind of as a whole family unit.
That's perfect. Keep in touch, right? Like communication.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for taking the time of coming here. And I loved having you. We'll probably try to have you again at some point. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me, Michelle. This was so wonderful. I appreciate it. It's great to talk with you.
Yes. That's it for today's episode of Complex Kids, Simple Solutions. If you found this helpful, please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes. And if you're looking for more support, join our Thrive group on Facebook, where we dive deeper and connect with other parents. For more information, be sure to visit www.wisdom4complexkids.com. Or you can also reach me at www.michelleshoaidi.com. Remember, you are doing an amazing job. Take it one step at a time, and I will see you next time. You are your child's hero.